Although the Boulder police called the FBI back into the case the next day, fatal mistakes are made during those first crucial 24 hours. Neighbors aren't questioned, searches aren't done, and the key witnesses aren't interviewed.
Was the family interviewed after the body was found?
Were we interviewing John and Patsy? No, we weren't. That would have been totally unreasonable at that point in time.
Walker disagrees. He says the parents should have been interviewed.
The parents or the folks that are going to be interviewed have to be made to understood that although this is a very traumatic event for them to have been involved, they have to try to put a little bit of that aside and sit down, if just briefly, and try to recount the events as they recall them to the investigator.
We've been told that what should have happened that morning is, instead of being told just to leave the house and hang around for a few days, we should have been taken immediately to the police department, interviewed separately. That would have protected us and our rights as much as anything. That wasn't done. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty standard procedure, we're told.
They didn't ask for our clothing until over a year later.
We had to ask for the pictures.
We couldn't even remember what we'd worn.
We didn't know what we had on.
Some experts who call to offer help and are refused say the real problem is that the people in charge are old-school cops fighting an old-fashioned turf war.
There were a couple of very difficult customers to deal with who made decisions early about who done it. And because they were inexperienced, neither one of them ever having worked a homicide case, and because they were in charge, basically, it was a rough period of time.
As if that isn't enough to make this case complicated, there's one more unexpected element. The parents aren't about to just sit by and do whatever the police tell them to do. The war between the Ramseys and the police starts 2 days after JonBenet's body is found. And soon the DA's office will get involved. From then on, the investigation will revolve around that awkward triangle. No one has ever seen anything like it. December 28, 1996. The investigation into JonBenet Ramsey's death is only 2 days old, and it's already in trouble. The Ramseys hold a memorial service for JonBenet at their Boulder church.
I was as near to death as I think I could possibly be and still be alive. You can't function. I mean, people said, well, if it had been me, I'd have been, doing this and that. So, well, maybe you're a better man than I was, but I couldn't. I was crushed in the full sense of that word.
They tell police they want to take her back to Atlanta, their hometown, for burial.
What we wanted to deal with immediately after her death was to lay her to rest. We came back to Boulder a few days after that with the sole purpose of sitting down with the police and helping them any way we could.
But what they hear makes them change their minds. Their friends tell them the police are threatening the unthinkable, to hold JonBenet's body until the couple agrees to interviews.
Our friends and attorneys sat us down and said, listen, you need to know what you're dealing with here. They are trying to convict you. And they related the story about how they had ransomed her body the week before, withheld her body for burial.
In a letter to us, Boulder County Coroner John Meyer confirmed that the police had considered holding JonBenet's body. For an extremely religious family like the Ramseys, it is unforgivable.
To think that they would withhold her body for proper burial was barbaric, absolutely barbaric, not to mention cruel. As I say, it was a deep blow that really widened a chasm of trust.
This becomes the moment when the investigation splits into warring factions. The Ramseys go on the offensive, hiring arguably the best attorneys in Denver. Then, while the police continue to wait for their interviews, the Ramseys do one with CNN. There's no question the police are focused on the Ramseys from the beginning of the case. FBI statistics pointed them in that direction.
I'm not familiar with anywhere a young child was killed in the home and the suspect ultimately did not turn out to be a family member. It might not have been a parent, but it could have been a brother or a sister or an uncle or some other family member.
What I've learned, both in our experience and looking at similar situations, is 100% of the time the police always focus on the parents. We understand you got to look at us. We're the parents. We're in the house. But for goodness sake, don't stop there. But they did.
Why shouldn't they hire attorneys? Every day in newspaper headlines across America, there are stories about innocent people on death row. Once the police lock in on you, whether you're guilty or innocent, you could be in big trouble.
And I think you and I as lawyers would advise our clients, or would advise a friend in this situation, get a lawyer. I think we would. I mean, I know I would.
This is when DA Alex Hunter enters the picture. He comes to the case with 25 years' experience, ready to do what the police have not. He calls in experts like Barry Scheck and Dr. Henry Lee from the O.J. Simpson trial, and puts together a task force of DAs that include Dave Thomas of Jefferson County, who will go through his own well-publicized tragedy in Littleton, Colorado.
I think it was at a point in time when he was starting to get truly drained emotionally and wanted to make sure that his objectivity was in place. Make sure I'm doing the right thing. Let's talk about this, and if maybe you can think about things that I haven't thought about. When you have one of those really tough, gut-wrenching cases, I think it is helpful.
What Hunter doesn't see coming is John Ramsey's lawyers, Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman. The National Law Journal lists Haddon as one of the nation's top white-collar crime attorneys. Haddon's firm pulls out the stops on the Ramsey case. Within days, the Ramseys put together a team that includes a media relation consultant and their own private investigators. They take out ads offering rewards, publish sections of the ransom note in the local newspaper, asking if anyone recognized the handwriting. They start their own website and hotline.
We had a lot of investigative work going on right from the beginning when we realized that the police just weren't cutting it.
Depending on your point of view, the Ramseys are either trying to generate leads the police aren't, or they are diverting attention from themselves.
How much did Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, either consciously or unconsciously or through their handlers, attempt to control this investigation and perhaps attempt to move the investigation away from them? I think that's something that no one will really ever know over time.
And then the final straw. The Ramseys' attorneys lay out conditions for how their clients will be interviewed. The interviews won't last more than 2 hours and will take place at Haddon's offices. The Ramseys will be interviewed together, and Patsy's doctor, as well as their counsel and private investigators, will be present. The police response is an emphatic no. January passes. February. March. And still no interviews.